Reviewing other soul lives. Could life reviews be one of our roles after death? By David Russo. What if your next role is helping another soul? Imagine that your earthly life has ended and you have completed a review of everything you experienced. You have seen your choices, relationships, successes, failures, kindness, regrets, and all the ways your life touched the lives around you. Perhaps you finally understood things that were impossible to understand while you were living them. But then the review ends, and instead of simply moving on, you are presented with possibilities for what comes next. What if one of those possibilities is helping another soul review its life? What if the wisdom gained from understanding your own human journey eventually allows you to help someone else understand theirs? Not as a judge deciding whether they were good or bad, but as a compassionate guide helping them see the complete story. We cannot know whether anything like this actually happens after death, but as a spiritual and philosophical thought experiment, it raises an extraordinary possibility. Perhaps understanding our own life is not only about us. Perhaps someday, somehow, what we learn could help another soul understand theirs. Introduction. After your own review is complete, if a life review exists, perhaps completing it would change the way consciousness understands the human experience. During life, we see events from inside a single perspective. We know what we intended, what frightened us, what disappointed us, and what we hoped would happen. But we rarely see the complete effects of our choices or fully understand the people around us. A life review, at least as it is often imagined in spiritual thought, could provide a wider perspective. Instead of seeing isolated moments, perhaps we would see patterns, connections, consequences, and meanings that were hidden while we were alive. And what if the wisdom gained from that experience could then become useful? Human beings already do something similar. Someone who survives a difficult experience may later become particularly capable of helping another person going through it. A recovering addict may counsel others. A grieving person may understand another person's grief in a way that textbooks cannot teach. A teacher often begins as a student. Could something analogous exist beyond physical life? Could there be spiritual roles, guides, helpers, teachers, or something for which we do not even have a human word? And among those possibilities, could helping another soul understand its life become one of them? Chapter 1. Who reviews the life review? When we imagine a life review, we might picture a soul standing alone before the complete record of its existence. Every decision appears. Every relationship returns. Every moment can suddenly be understood from a perspective that was unavailable while living it. But would such an experience necessarily happen alone? Perhaps another consciousness participates, not to control the experience, but to help the soul understand what it is seeing. That presence might be described as a guide, teacher, helper, another soul, or even an expression of some greater consciousness. Seeing everything does not necessarily mean understanding everything. Even during our earthly lives, we can know the facts of an event and still misunderstand its meaning. We may remember an argument perfectly while remaining unaware of what the other person was experiencing. We may know that we hurt someone without understanding why we acted the way we did. If a life review exposed an enormous amount of information simultaneously, perhaps guidance would help place those experiences into a larger context. That opens the possibility of souls or forms of consciousness that become especially skilled at assisting with this process. Perhaps they help the reviewing soul recognize patterns, confront difficult truths, and notice beautiful things it overlooked. Their purpose would not necessarily be to explain everything. They might simply ask the right questions. What were you afraid of here? What did the person need from you? What did you learn? What could you not see then that you can see now? Perhaps the life reviewer is less like a prosecutor and more like a spiritual mirror. Chapter 2. Reviewer or Judge. The words review and judgment can create very different images. Judgment suggests a verdict, right or wrong, guilty or innocent, worthy or unworthy. Review suggests examination. It asks us to look carefully at what happened, why it happened, what resulted from it, and what can now be understood. If another soul helped with a life review, perhaps its purpose would not be to place our existence onto a cosmic scoreboard. Perhaps its purpose would be to help us see clearly. This would not eliminate accountability. Compassion does not require pretending that harmful actions were harmless. In fact, genuine understanding may require seeing consequences more completely than we ever could during life. Imagine experiencing not only an angry sentence you spoke, but understanding how that sentence affected the person who heard it. At the same time, perhaps you would also see the fear, insecurity, pain, or ignorance within yourself that contributed to saying it. Neither side erases the other. Responsibility and understanding could exist simultaneously. A reviewer, therefore, might never need to declare, "You were a terrible person." Instead, the questions might be deeper. What happened here? What did your action create? Why did you make that choice? What do you understand now? If the purpose of the experience is growth, condemnation alone would accomplish very little. Understanding could accomplish much more. Perhaps the most advanced form of accountability is not punishment, but becoming completely unable to hide from the truth while simultaneously being given the compassion necessary to face it. Chapter 3. Could your own life prepare you for the role? Perhaps our earthly experiences would matter beyond the lessons they teach us personally. Think about the qualities people develop through living: patience, empathy, resilience, forgiveness, courage, humility, and the ability to see situations from more than one perspective. These qualities are rarely developed in perfect circumstances. Often they emerge precisely because life becomes difficult. A person learns patience because something tested it. Someone learns forgiveness because there was something painful to forgive. If helping other souls were possible, perhaps hardship would provide a kind of understanding that could not be obtained theoretically. A soul that experienced poverty might understand the fear created by financial insecurity. One that experienced rejection might recognize how deeply the need for acceptance can influence human behavior. A soul that struggled with anger, jealousy, pride, or addiction might understand those struggles from inside rather than merely observing them from a distance. Even our mistakes could potentially become part of our qualifications. Human beings sometimes become powerful teachers precisely because they have failed. They know the traps because they fell into them. They understand rationalization because they once rationalized their own behavior. Perhaps spiritual wisdom would work similarly. The imperfect human experience might not disqualify a soul from helping others. It might be exactly what allows that soul to say, in whatever form communication takes beyond this life, "I understand how difficult being human can be." Chapter 4. Learning to see an entire life. Imagine being able to see another person's entire lifetime at once. You would not meet them at age 40 and assume that the person standing before you appeared from nowhere. You would see the child they once were. You might witness the encouragement they received and the encouragement they never received. You would see moments of fear nobody else knew about, private disappointments they never discussed, dreams that they abandoned, people they loved, opportunities they missed, and decisions that changed everything afterward. That perspective could transform the meaning of behavior. A person who seemed emotionally distant might suddenly become understandable when you see the experiences that taught them not to trust. Someone obsessed with achievement might look different when you witness the childhood moment when they concluded that accomplishment was the only way to receive approval. Understanding the origin of behavior does not automatically excuse its consequences, but it changes the picture. Instead of seeing only what someone did, you begin to see how they became the person who did it. Perhaps this would create a form of compassion difficult to achieve during earthly life. We usually meet people somewhere in the middle of their stories. We see a few pages and assume we understand the entire book. A life reviewer would theoretically see every chapter. What appeared senseless from one moment might become understandable when viewed across 80 years. Perhaps one of the great lessons of reviewing another soul's life would be discovering how incomplete our judgments of one another usually were. Chapter 5. Experiencing the ripple effects. No human life exists completely by itself. Every person influences other people, and those people influence still others. Imagine a life review revealing these chains of cause and effect. Perhaps a teacher encourages a struggling student. The student remembers those words, continues pursuing an education, becomes a doctor, and eventually helps thousands of people. The teacher may never know any of this occurred, yet one moment of encouragement became part of a chain extending far beyond the original interaction. Negative actions could produce ripples as well. A parent's anger might influence how a child eventually treats their own children. A betrayal could affect someone's ability to trust years later. But even here, a compassionate reviewer might resist reducing a person to their worst actions. The purpose would be to understand the ripple honestly, where it began, how it traveled, where responsibility belongs, and perhaps where someone else eventually interrupted the pattern. The smallest interactions might prove surprisingly significant. A smile given to a stranger, a phone call made at exactly the right moment, a cruel joke, an apology, a decision to stay, a decision to leave. Tiny events can redirect lives. Perhaps the reviewer would help the soul see that its life was never isolated. We constantly enter one another's stories, sometimes for decades and sometimes for only seconds. Seeing those connections might reveal that an ordinary human life was far more interconnected than it ever appeared from the inside. Chapter 6. Helping a soul face its mistakes. There could be moments in a life review that are extraordinarily difficult to face. Imagine seeing your greatest regret with complete clarity. There would be no ability to rewrite the memory, minimize your responsibility, or hide behind the explanations you once gave yourself. Perhaps you would understand exactly what happened and exactly how another person experienced your actions. What kind of guide would be useful in such a moment? A compassionate reviewer might help the soul remain present with the truth without collapsing into endless self-condemnation. There is an important difference between responsibility and self-destruction. Responsibility says, I understand what I did and what it caused. Self-condemnation says, because I did something terrible, I can never become anything more than that action. If spiritual growth exists beyond death, perhaps remaining permanently trapped inside regret would accomplish little. The important question might become what consciousness can learn from finally seeing clearly. Instead of saying, look how terrible you were, the reviewer might ask, what can you understand now that you could not understand then? Perhaps the soul recognizes fear behind its anger, insecurity behind its jealousy, or unconscious pain behind its harmful behavior. Again, understanding would not erase responsibility. It would deepen it. The mistake would no longer need to become a permanent spiritual label. It could become a doorway into expanded awareness and perhaps eventually into the ability to help another soul facing a similar realization. Chapter 7. Showing the good they never knew they did. A life review might contain surprises of a very different kind. Most people probably have no idea how many positive effects they have created. Someone may remember offering a few encouraging words and consider the moment insignificant. But perhaps those words stayed with another person for decades. Maybe they prevented someone from giving up. Maybe a teacher, parent, coworker, friend, neighbor, or stranger changed the direction of another person's life without ever knowing it. Imagine being shown forgotten kindness. You see the person you comforted 20 years earlier. You discover that someone remembered your generosity long after you forgot giving it. You see how your children carried something you taught them into their own families. You discover that a small sacrifice mattered enormously to someone else. Perhaps many people would be astonished to learn that some of their most important contributions were not their biggest achievements, but moments they barely remembered. A reviewer might therefore help a soul understand not only where it fell short, but also where it mattered. This could be particularly powerful for someone who spent much of life believing they were insignificant. Imagine discovering that your existence altered countless lives in subtle ways. Perhaps part of understanding a lifetime would be recognizing its complete value, not pretending every action was good, but seeing the entire balance of influence that was impossible to perceive while living. Chapter 8. What would the reviewer learn? If a soul helped another consciousness understand its life, the learning might not travel in only one direction. The reviewer could also be changed by what it witnesses. Every human life contains circumstances that no other person experiences in exactly the same way. Different families, cultures, historical periods, personalities, bodies, opportunities, limitations, relationships, and challenges create enormously different journeys. Imagine witnessing hundreds of thousands of complete human lives. You might understand courage through someone who lived under circumstances you never faced. You might understand loneliness through someone whose isolation was completely different from your own. You might witness people making choices you once judged harshly and finally understand the pressures surrounding those decisions. Each life could become another window into what it means to experience existence from a particular point of view. Perhaps spiritual growth could therefore continue through service. The reviewer teaches, but the reviewed soul also teaches the reviewer. The distinction between student and teacher begins to dissolve. This happens in human life already. Great teachers frequently say that their students teach them. Perhaps something similar could happen spiritually. Helping another consciousness understand its journey might simultaneously expand your own understanding of existence. Chapter 9. Could souls have different jobs? The idea of roles after death raises an even broader question. If consciousness continues, could there be different forms of purpose beyond physical life? Human language immediately reaches for familiar terms: guides, teachers, healers, reviewers, helpers, explorers. But these words may be crude metaphors. If a non-physical reality exists, whatever happens there might be so different from earthly existence that calling these activities jobs would be like describing the internet to someone from ancient Rome as a very fast library. Still, the metaphor allows us to explore the possibility. Perhaps different forms of consciousness gravitate toward different kinds of service or experience. A soul fascinated by learning might continue exploring. Another, deeply oriented toward compassion, might assist others. Someone whose earthly life revolved around teaching might be attracted to guidance. Or perhaps none of our earthly preferences carry forward in the way we imagine. We simply do not know. The important point is not to turn the afterlife into an invisible corporation with supernatural job titles. The idea is much larger than that. If consciousness continues to develop, perhaps purpose continues as well. There might be forms of participation, creation, learning, connection, and service that human minds cannot presently conceptualize. Reviewing lives would then represent only one imaginative possibility within something potentially far greater. Chapter 10. Could you choose to become a life reviewer? Imagine your own life review ending. You understand your life from a perspective you never possessed while living it. Then possibilities appear before you. Perhaps you could return to another earthly experience. Perhaps you could remain in some different state of consciousness. Perhaps you could learn, explore, rest, reconnect with other souls, or participate in something completely beyond human imagination. And perhaps one possibility is helping others through the same process you just experienced. Why might someone choose that role? Maybe completing your own review creates an enormous appreciation for the guide who helped you. You remember the difficult moments when you wanted to turn away and the presence that helped you keep looking. You remember discovering goodness you never knew you created. Having received that guidance, perhaps you feel drawn to provide it to someone else. Maybe preparation would be necessary. Perhaps understanding one lifetime would not automatically qualify consciousness to guide another. There could be learning we cannot imagine, or perhaps the experience itself is the preparation. It leads to a fascinating personal question. If such a choice were actually presented to you, would you take it? Would you want to witness other lives in their entirety and help souls understand what they had experienced? The answer might reveal something about the kind of purpose you value even now. Hello, this is David Russo. Being a reviewer for a soul that has crossed over has a nice ring to it. And maybe the idea isn't as far-fetched as it first seems. There could be other tools, perspectives, or ways of approaching a life review on the other side that we simply can't imagine from where we are now. Life has fascinating things to offer us, but perhaps the afterlife does too. If something like this role exists, I think it would be fascinating to discover what helping another soul understand its journey would actually be like. Chapter 11. When the reviewer encounters someone they knew. Now imagine something even more challenging. What if the soul whose life you were helping review belonged to someone you knew on earth? Perhaps it was a friend or relative. Perhaps it was someone you loved deeply. Or perhaps it was a former partner, rival, enemy, or person with whom you carried unresolved pain. Suddenly, the life before you is not the story of a stranger. It intersects with your own. For the first time, perhaps you could see their perspective completely. You might witness conversations the two of you shared, but now experience what those moments meant to them. You might discover why they withdrew, why they became angry, why they made a decision you never understood, or why they were unable to give you something you desperately wanted from them. They, in turn, might finally understand your experience. Events that produced decades of resentment could look entirely different when both sides become visible. Would personal history make you less capable of helping them or uniquely qualified? Perhaps there would be some situations in which another reviewer would be more appropriate. But perhaps certain encounters could become opportunities for extraordinary reconciliation. Two people who never managed to understand one another during physical life might finally see the entire story. If something like that were possible, the life review might become more than individual reflection. It could become a place where relationships themselves are finally understood. Chapter 12. Eventually becoming the guide. There is a beautiful pattern hidden inside the possibility. First, you live a human life. Then perhaps you review it. Through that review, you understand more than you could while you were living. Someone or something may help guide you through the process. Eventually, after receiving guidance, perhaps you become capable of offering guidance yourself. The student becomes the teacher, and the person who once needed help becomes the one providing it. This pattern appears throughout human life. Children become parents. Students become teachers. Beginners become masters. People who once needed encouragement eventually encourage someone else. Those who survive difficult experiences sometimes become guides for others entering the same darkness. Perhaps if consciousness continues developing beyond physical existence, this familiar pattern could continue in a form we cannot presently see. Maybe service to other consciousness would itself become another stage of spiritual growth. Perhaps the journey is never simply about accumulating wisdom for ourselves. Wisdom reaches its fullest expression when it becomes useful to someone else. We begin by asking, who will help me understand my life? But perhaps somewhere much further along the journey, the question changes. Whose life might I someday help them understand? Conclusion. Perhaps the review is also preparation. If life reviews exist, perhaps their purpose would not simply be to look backward. Perhaps reviewing a lifetime would prepare consciousness for whatever comes next. We might see our mistakes without excuses, recognize kindness we had forgotten, understand relationships from multiple perspectives, and discover the enormous network of consequences created by seemingly ordinary decisions. Such an experience could transform the meaning of an entire human lifetime. And perhaps the wisdom gained through that transformation would not have to remain ours alone. Maybe everything we struggle to learn here, patience, compassion, forgiveness, accountability, courage, perspective, could someday become useful to another consciousness. Perhaps the experiences that once seemed like weaknesses could even become sources of understanding. The person who struggled might understand struggle. The person who made mistakes might know how to help another soul face its mistakes. The person who received compassion might eventually learn how to offer it. There is no way for us to know whether life reviewers, spiritual roles, or even life reviews themselves actually exist. But the possibility gives us something valuable to consider while we are still alive. Because we do not have to wait until death to practice being a compassionate reviewer of another person's life, we can become slower to judge and quicker to ask what someone may have experienced. We can listen more carefully, forgive when forgiveness is appropriate, recognize struggles we cannot see, and remind people of the good they may not recognize in themselves. Perhaps spiritual growth is not ultimately measured only by how much wisdom we acquire. Perhaps it is also measured by what we do with that wisdom. And if there really is a moment beyond this life when we are asked what we would like to do next, maybe one extraordinary answer could be, I would like to help someone else understand the life they just lived.